Welcome back to the channel, everybody. I hope you're all doing well. My name is Melody, and a while back, I released the previous episode of this series focusing on the more questionable Mortal Kombat projects of the late 90s and the start of the millennium. This video remains our most successful video on the channel so far, so I just want to take a moment to thank everyone for the love and support you all showed. It means the world to me that you all love that video so much. If you wish to support the production of videos like this one, all it takes is hitting the like button and it really helps us out. However, we do have a membership on our page as well as a link to our Patreon down below. Both will grant special perks for subscribing, such as access to early content, exclusive content, producer credits on videos, and more. If you're curious at all, make sure to check those out down below. So, after an overly long hiatus, I felt it was time to get back into our own little trip down the road to Mortal Kombat 1. Despite the previous era of Mortal Kombat being far from perfect, the franchise saw no signs of slowing down in the early 2000s, which saw the releases of the PlayStation 2, Nintendo GameCube, and the original Xbox. Another generation of consoles meant it was time for the expanding teen and midway games to rise to the occasion with a new generation of Mortal Kombat games that took what Mortal Kombat 4 had experimented with to another level. In November of 2002, Midway went bigger than ever before with the release of Mortal Kombat Deadly Alliance. Where previous mainline Mortal Kombat entries were designed to exist in both arcades and home consoles, Deadly Alliance was the first game to be designed to only be played at home on the new fancy consoles of the time, since arcades were sadly becoming a thing of the past. However, the reception of Deadly Alliance showed that fans still loved Mortal Kombat, with nothing but high ratings and praising reviews across the board, as well as profitable sales, with 1.3 million copies sold by January 2003. So, no, it was Mortal Kombat destined to keep going, but Deadly Alliance would end up being an important piece of my life. As I stated in previous episodes, I did not grow up with any of the original trilogy. My exposure to Mortal Kombat began with the 1995 movie, and when my older brother and I received our PlayStation 2, I was blessed with my first Mortal Kombat game with Deadly Alliance. Even now, seeing the opening cinematic brought me right back to the early 2000s. Snacking on Gushers, and watching shows like Samurai Jack. When I was little, this game was everything to me. I couldn't wait to get home from school to play it. I was always excited to play it with my brother. And even though I was terrible at the game, I never stopped loving it. Sadly, when hard times came, I had to sell my PlayStation 2 and my games to help stay afloat, which meant the loss of my copy of Deadly Alliance. So I have not played this game in over a decade. Plenty of good memories came back from the moment I started replaying the game. And while I try not to get blighted by nostalgia, those memories are what helped pave the way for videos like this one, and my love for the Mortal Kombat franchise as a whole. Without Deadly Alliance, I never would have played games that I now consider S tier, such as Mortal Kombat 3 or Mortal Kombat 9. So, that must mean I still love the game, right? Well, love is a strong word. I still grinned ear to ear with the story, Shang Tsung and Quan Chi, two of my favorite villains in all of gaming, working together as the titular Deadly Alliance to take on Shao Kahn and Liu Kang. The visual of Shang Tsung snapping Liu Kang's neck remains an impactful scene to witness because it lets you know things just got real and nobody is safe in this franchise. Little did we know that developers would end up becoming quite fond of killing off this character. Warriors from all realms come together. Raiden is no longer an elder god, and it's going to be the end of all things if the sorcerers win.
We must act now. We must stop this Deadly Alliance.
Oh yeah, that gives me chills. After you create your profile with a password that everybody forgot, so we always had to write it down or make it as simple as possible, it's off to the arcade mode like usual, and
holy shit.
okay, I'm just gonna play it out there. Deadly Alliance has easily one of the top 3 character select songs I've ever heard. It's impossible to not want to get up and jam. Is it a little cheesy and very much a product of its time? Yes, but damn it, I love it. While Mortal Kombat 4 introduced the idea of 3D visuals, Deadly Alliance makes the 3D camera environment into gameplay mechanics, with characters able to move at a full 360 around their opponent. This wasn't a revolutionary mechanic, with games such as Tekken and Soul Calibur using it for years, but it was a logical next step for Mortal Kombat, and would continue to be a staple for the next few games. Combined with this new style of movement came stances, where all fighters have different fighting styles, each with their own set of combos that can transition into each other with the right inputs, and when pulled off, it makes for some of the most satisfying moments in matches. This stance mechanic features an evolution of the weapon system that was introduced in Mortal Kombat 4, where each character has a designated weapon stance. In MK4, I felt that the weapons were absolutely useless. In Deadly Alliance, they are far more pivotal to the combat, and since they don't go away after a single hit, it makes it far more satisfying to control, even if some of the weapons are copy and pasted between characters. Along with the new gameplay style came a plethora of new characters for the roster, as well as some familiar ones to varying results. On one hand, fighters like Li Mei, Frost, and Kenshi, they continue to have their chances to shine in recent Mortal Kombat games. On the other hand, Suhao exists and nobody likes him. Yet if someone in the comments tries to say that they like Suhao, they're lying. And whoever decided that this should be Bon Raicho, we need to have a talk. Another new addition to the game was the very first incarnation of the Crypt, which would continue to be evolved and become a beloved mode by fans. What is the Crypt? Well, by completing different matches in Arcade versus Conquest and more, the player earns different colors of coins that can be spent in the Crypt to open coffins for various rewards. These range from unlocking characters themselves to alternate costumes, to even something as lackluster as a sketch made behind the scenes. Woohoo! It's easy to see why the Crypt became a staple of the franchise. It is just fun to go through and try to see what can be earned if you have no idea what each coffin contains. And when you get a new skin or an arena or even a character, it is super satisfying. Add in some extras like the Mortal Kombat history featurette, it is clear that a lot of care was put into Mortal Kombat Deadly Alliance. With that said, however, while I love revisiting this childhood classic, it has not aged with the most grace, in my opinion. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying Deadly Alliance is necessarily bad, it just pales in comparison to other games in this franchise. As I mentioned earlier, I respect the change to 3D movement. I thought it was a great idea, but sadly the execution has much to be desired. In my experience while revisiting Deadly Alliance, I quickly discovered that the game struggles with movement because there are plenty of times where I wanted to strafe up or down, but the character wouldn't refrain from jumping or ducking, making some situations difficult because dodging attacks is very much important this time around. Adding to that frustration, the inputs were rather inconsistent, where 1 minute, combos and special moves would flow just right, but then I would lose all momentum the next minute with all my attacks dropping after the second hit. So the special moves just stopped working completely, even though I knew for a fact that I was inputting them correctly. The frustration got worse when the game would sometimes stutter, thus ending my input instantly, also ruining any flow. Also, I kept running into a weird error now and then, where my character would just not stop jumping. Perhaps it was my copy, or perhaps I was playing poorly, but I struggled with the combat, which is a shame because I did have fun most of the time, especially with characters like Scorpion. As a kid, Johnny Cage was my go-to, but today, I found myself playing as Sonya Blade the most. Unfortunately though, even with my best characters, I found myself disappointed by what was available for the characters in terms of gameplay. Even though there are 3 fighting stances per character, Deadly Alliance's combat overall feels unfinished. Most characters have 1 or 2 combos that can transition between all 3 fighting styles to deal out some great damage in satisfying ways, but that's basically it. Even in terms of special moves, most characters were reduced to only 2 or 3, which feels lackluster at times. This brings me to the arcade ladder, which threw me for a loop. Like always, the arcade mode gets more difficult the closer you get to the final bosses, which in this case are Shang Tsung and Quan Chi. Well, Deadly Alliance quickly gave me flashbacks of going through the original Mortal Kombat 2 arcade ladder, because the AI opponents would demolish me. Even with all the practice in the world, some of these opponents in the latter half of the ladder would make me want to pull my hair out. At this point in my life, I know how to play a Mortal Kombat game, so getting through the ladder being one of the hardest things to do in this franchise was something I was not expecting, especially when I got to Mudlock. Oh, crap, Malak. Where do I begin with this three-eyed work with legs? So, never mind the fact that he looks like the most generic monster in a fantasy RPG thrown into Mortal Kombat, this thing makes Goro from Mortal Kombat 4 seem like a cakewalk. This is something that I feel Mortal Kombat games still struggle with, bosses being so stupidly difficult that it requires the player to basically rely on luck to win. Just hope that the boss doesn't pull out some cheap unblockable moves, or hope that your moves don't miss, or Brook controls don't ruin your flow. Part of me was convinced that Moloch was originally intended to be the final boss instead of the sub-boss, but he was so lame in comparison to Shang Tsung and Quan Chi because even though the titular villains were tough, I beat them far quicker than Moloch. But other than providing a satisfying win, there's nothing memorable about Moloch. He's just a generic monster. And that's what resulted in him becoming a throwaway cameo in Mortal Kombat X and 11, like the bitch that he is. But I did feel joy beating both him and the Deadly Alliance, resulting in a very basic champion screen and ending narration that I did not care about. Woo. Whole lie to you all, I was actually so frustrated after beating the arcade mode that I was ready to just move on to the next game. That is until I saw the Conquest mode. For whatever reason, I actually had no memory of this mode, and I assumed it was going to be some kind of story mode based on my experience with a future game. So, I started up and found myself surprised because it comprised up of 218 missions. God damn.
By the Elder Gods.
Then I discovered that, essentially, the Conquest mode is the training mode for Deadly Alliance, with the strange framing device of a monk traversing ultra-edgy locations like the Abyss of Fire and the Dismal March. What's next, Ouchie Ow Canyon? The player picks a character from the roster, plays through 10 missions that teach the ins and outs of said character, then it's back to the character select menu to hear. I will admit that this mode did help me learn some characters that I was originally having trouble with, such as Sub-Zero and Kenshi, but I mostly played Conquest to earn more coins for the crypt. Why? Because I was determined to unlock one specific character, one that I just needed to play.
I missed you.
So, this is Reptile, in possibly his most controversial design. Everybody makes fun of it, calling it the worst he's ever looked, and it was quickly replaced in future games. And I kinda love it. Is it my favorite Reptile design? Hell no. However, Midway made this version of Reptile so derpy that he's actually kind of adorable to witness. I mean, look at that face. Look at him. He's so precious with little crab dance. Look at him. And he's actually kind of fun to play. Definitely one of my favorites in this particular game. With some fun animations and a fatality that's about as classic as a Reptile finisher can get. Speaking of which, the fatalities are here, and they are about as mixed as the character roster itself. Some are fun, some are fittingly brutal, especially for the time, but then there are others that are...
What in the actual
Yeah, let's move on. There are other benefits to completing the Conquest mode, such as unlocking secret characters, but I personally felt that I had experienced enough of Deadly Alive. Frustrations aside, I was happy to revisit this gem from my childhood. It may not be the golden classic that I remember, but it is fun nonetheless. It shows how far the franchise had grown up to that point and has continued to grow ever since. And that is perfectly shown with the next entry because after the major success of Deadly Alliance, Midway wasted no time in making the sequel. Mortal Kombat Deception. My memory of this game is much smaller than Deadly Alliance because as a kid I only rented this game once from Crazy Mike's. Hey, who remembers this store? And it wasn't long afterward that the next game came out. So, I only played Deception very briefly. So replaying now was kind of like my first true experience with the game. Now, when I first started this section, I was a little bit concerned it would just be a carbon copy of Deadly Alliance, but with different characters. However, I am happy to say that while this section does maintain most of Deadly Alliance's gameplay style, it showed heavy improvement from its predecessor. Characters much smoother to control, the combat flowed a little bit more. There was even more combos and special moves to master, and new mechanics were introduced, including the much needed combo breakers, and environments playing a bigger part in the matches. Stage transitions for more Combat 3 were back and better than ever, and the stage fatalities made a triumphant return. There are very few things more satisfying than knocking an opponent that was irritating you into a fiery pit or a grinder. It is almost night and day how much I enjoyed Deception more than Deadly Alliance. Just going through the arcade ladder felt so much better. I was actually excited to get to the big boss for the game this time. This Goliath-looking horned man is Onaga, and he is the previous emperor of Outworld before Shao Kahn, and he wants his realm back. While I have nothing against Shang Tsung and Quan Chi, they are iconic villains, their only real impact on the story was killing Liu Kang. Otherwise, they just felt like any other fighter in the game. Onaga, on the other hand,
wins. Onaga wins. Onaga wins. Onaga wins. Onaga wins.
did I mention that Mortal Kombat games have overpowered bosses? No, I get it. He's the final boss. He's supposed to be hard. But Jesus, it should not take over 40 tries to beat him. Sometimes I felt like I had a better time taking on the final boss of Bloodborne. But beating the Dragon King was satisfying to check off my to-do list. Many aspects of Deadly Lights do make a return though, from the 3 stances to the crypt. However, the crypt does have quite a few things that are locked away and can't just be opened with coins. How does one unlock them? That's where the much improved Conquest mode comes in. While it can be classified as another training mode because the main character Shujinko just transforms into other characters on the roster, there is an actual story this time, with Shujinko traversing the realms across his life with the guidance of Damashi to stop evil. This is one of the most unique story modes in any fighting game I've ever played, because it is semi-open world and you can talk to people, get side missions, and earn various types of rewards, from coins to the keys that open up specific coffins in the crypt. And these reward characters, skins, and arenas. It almost feels like someone put a little bit of The Legend of Zelda into a Mortal Kombat game, and this was the result. And I got really excited by this mode. Until I heard the characters speak.
It is too late to start any classes today. Why don't you meet me here tomorrow morning at around 6? We can accomplish a lot if we get an early start. See you tomorrow.
But Master Boraicho will not let me outside the walls of the town. I will, Damashi. Thank you. I will not let the Elder Gods down.
Is there anything I can do to help?
If you could get my key back from the brigands, I could get you the medallion. They usually do not stray far from the beach.
I will return with your key, fisherman, and these brigands will know the fist of Shujinko.
Greetings, mortal. I am Shinnok. I was unjustly imprisoned in this realm many ages ago. I seek a lost amulet, my means of escape.
While I was not expecting the high-tier voice acting that we get in the current games, these cutscenes were rough to get through sometimes, especially when the main character Shujinko gave me flashbacks to Mortal Kombat 4's voice acting.
I am ready to prove that my combat skills are good enough.
You are tearing me apart, Lisa!
On top of that, controlling Shujinko in the main open world is awkward. It's hard to turn him, and if you move, he shoots off like a rocket. And don't even try sprinting because he moves like he's on Red Bull. All that is I still had a lot of fun with the Conquest mode, from the side quests to some of the turns that the story took. I personally enjoyed playing with time and seeing what changes throughout the day. For example, at 2 AM I was able to catch a pervert spying on a woman and make him pay for it.
You should...
Hey, young man, you got knocked the fuck out.
It is a far better way to train gamers than the random missions in Deadly Alliance, in my personal opinion. Deception was also the beginning of fun alternate modes in Mortal Kombat games. There was chess combat, which I personally wasn't all that fond of, but I could see the appeal. It's chess, but with quick matches between characters of the player's choice who represent the pieces on the board. It's that simple, but effective. Then there was puzzle combat, and the best way I could describe that is it's Dr. Mario, but Mortal Kombat. Make groups of a color, use a special piece of that color to make them disappear for points, make combos to deal damage against the opponent. If someone has played Dr. Mario, it will likely adjust to puzzle combat pretty fast. And I got pretty addicted to this one, since I was always a fan of these kinds of games. As for the characters this time around, Deception is probably about as mixed as Deadly Alliance. I love playing as characters like Sindel, Scorpion, Melina. They were a ton of fun to play. But then there are characters like Cobra, who is pretty much just a parody of Ken from Street Fighter, and he's absolutely pathetic. Dairu, and in my opinion, the best looking Sub-Zero, but sadly might be one of the worst he's ever played. It's actually pretty easy to see that Midway preferred some characters because I would play them and they would play buttery smooth, but then I would swap to another character and they just never clicked. Whereas in the other games, I can pick up and play the entire roster with a smile on my face. That didn't stop me from trying to master these characters because this time, Midway seemed to learn the lesson in the previous game and gave the character not only 2 fatalities this time around, but a new form of finisher known as the
Harakiri.
These are basically self-fatalities that allow players to take themselves out at the end of the match in their own unique way instead of their opponent. It's an alright addition, but I am far more interested in the fatalities, which are actually unique when they could have just easily poured the ones from Deadly Alliance. And they are what is expected. Fun, brutal, and sometimes pretty humorous. Their fatalities, not much to say about other than I like these ones way better than Deadly Alliance. Much to my dismay, Reptile was nowhere to be seen. You bastards. But I did get my girl Jade back, and I'm always happy to see her. And overall, fans seem to be happier with the roster, gameplay, and overall feel for the game because, still to this day, Mortal Kombat Deception is considered the Mortal Kombat 2 of the 3D era. It's just bigger and better in almost every way. This led to it actually selling better than Deadly Alliance, with a strong launch in October of 2004 and managing to sell 1.9 million copies by the next year.
Money, money, money.
In 2006, Deception will actually see a re-release, following the pattern of Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3 and Mortal Kombat Gold, was exclusive to the too often forgotten PlayStation Portable. This version of the game featured Blaze, Frost, Jax, and Kitana as 4 new playable characters, along with 2 extra characters that were previously only available in the GameCube version, Goro and Shao Kahn, making it a total of 32 characters on the roster, a record high for the series at the time. A record that would be broken yet again with the very next mainline entry. However, before we get to that, it would seem that Midway was not ready to give up on the idea of Mortal Kombat spin-offs, because 1 year later in 2005, fans were given Mortal Kombat Shaolin Monks. What is Shaolin Monks exactly? Well, it is a third-person action-adventure brawler game set in the Mortal Kombat universe. Yeah, I was kind of terrified to boot this one up, but I did it for you all. If you all recall, in the last video, when I took a look at Mortal Kombat Mythology Sub-Zero, I mentioned that the original plan was to follow that game up with another Mythologies game starring Liu Kang, only for it to be cancelled. Well, Midway was able to make that game a reality after all, since Shaolin Monks allows players to control Liu Kang and Kung Lao on their own adventure together. And this is probably the only game in the franchise that I have zero history with. I never rented it, I never owned it, hell, I never even heard about it until far later in life. That didn't give me much hope, considering at least Sub-Zero and Special Forces had reputations. So what kind of Netherrealm torture was I in for? This is fun. Smooth and fluid combat, special moves, fatalities, environmental puzzles. Why is this good? This shouldn't be good, but madness concocted by Quan Chi is this. So, yeah, this is basically what Special Forces should have been, and more. It's an action-adventure game focused on traversing through linear levels, brutally murdering enemies, thus granting health via glowing orbs, unlocking new abilities by defeating various bosses, completing quick time events, and learning how to master your attacks for a high hit counter that grants extra experience. Sound familiar? That's right, Shaolin Monks is a clone of Dante's Inferno. I mean, the resemblances are just uncanny. Yes, this is not a traditional fighting game, but a hack and slasher without any of the hacking or slashing. Instead, Liu Kang and Kung Lao are running around beating everything to a pile of blood and meat with their bare hands. Or a razor-tip hat if you pick Kung Lao like I did, because Kung Lao deserves better, damn it! There are combos to unlock and master along with special abilities that can help players solve puzzles in new and previous areas in a similar way to a Metroidvania game. Of course, it's not a Mortal Kombat game without the fatalities and brutalities, taking the place of special takedowns usually seen in other games. Brutalities are more or less Shaolin Monks' take on rage mode you've likely seen prior and after, while fatalities are quick little finishing moves that you can use if you input the right code. And the story is an interesting one since it bridges the gap between the original Mortal Kombat and Mortal Kombat 2. It goes on to tell the story of Mortal Kombat 2, but only from the perspectives of the titular monks. I won't break down the whole thing from beginning to end, but I did like the route that Shaolin Monks took to show how Shang Tsung and Shao Kahn tried to invade first round via second tournament. Besides Deception, no other mainline Mortal Kombat game attempted to feature a flowing narrative at the time, and Shaolin Monks nailed it. Especially with the many locations that Kang and Lao go through on their journey. From the Wuxi Academy, to a remastered version of Reptile's Lair from Mortal Kombat 4, to the many locations or Outworld, to even the Netherrealm itself, to me a lot of familiar characters that fans know and love. Speaking of whom, while I don't hate any of the costumes seen in the 3D era, none of them really hooked me. In Shaolin Monks, even the characters that are only there for cutscenes are given distinguished redesigns specific to this game alone, and some of them are far superior to what was seen in this era of Mortal Kombat. I think Sonya looks perfect, my boy Reptile got a much needed upgrade from Deadly Alliance, and I think this version of Scorpion might be one of his best designs. By the way, whoever decided to put this reference into the game gets my eternal respect. All of the levels and locations from beginning to end just scream Mortal Kombat. They have that dark and macabre vibe, but also the mysticism and fantastical elements that make Mortal Kombat universe so iconic. There were plenty of times when I wanted to just sit back and bask in not only the visuals but the atmosphere that the levels brought to the table. Even something as ugly and dismal as Shang Tsung's fortress where you fight Baraka ended up being appealing to the eyes. And each location typically has a standout character to enhance each section in its own diverse ways. And a lot of these characters end up being boss fights to varying qualities. Scorpion was a delight with the multiple phases you have to go through and using a bit more tactics to deal with him, rather than just punching him enough times until he dropped dead. Same with Baraka, who ended up having one of the most complex fights that kept things interesting throughout, via the many changes to the fight. One of the hardest fights for me ended up being Reptile, where I had to not only beat his giant pet snake before fighting him, but Reptile himself uses invisibility and poison blast to absolutely slaughter me. However, I will say that this fight was a pain because if I lost, it was back at the very beginning to fight the snake, then attempting to fight Reptile again. And I had a few angry moments during this. I had the same frustration with the final boss, which is technically an endurance round of 3 boss fights, and losing any of them meant starting over from the first boss. Oddly enough though, Shaolin Monks has probably the easiest version of Goro to ever exist. Even though the game is called Shaolin Monks, Liu Kang and Kung Lao are not the only playable characters. Scorpion and Sub-Zero are both unlockable to replay the story with, and then, exclusively to the Versus mode, there is Baraka, Kitana, Reptile, and Johnny Cage. Sadly, I am all alone in this Mortal Kombat journey, so I didn't really get a chance to play the Versus mode or play through the story in co-op. But that said though, there is plenty to enjoy in single player since Kung Lao and Liu Kang feature their own abilities and combos, so playing through the game twice or even 4 times as each and every character keeps the game fresh. If you're a Mortal Kombat fan like I am, you'll love all the Easter eggs and callbacks as you play through Shaolin Monks. From the hooded Shadow Priest straight out of the Portal Arena from Mortal Kombat 2 to Outworld having the dark purple skies from Mortal Kombat Annihilation. There's even a nice touch that all of the sound effects during gameplay, from the attacks to even the sounds that characters make, are simply the sound bites from previous games. Things like that had me grinning from ear to ear throughout the game. And if that's not enough, Shaolin Monks has plenty of unintentional comedy that had me giggling constantly, from the less stellar voice acting to the awkward storytelling. Like this, right before the Baraka fight, this exchange happened that had me dropping to the floor. Wow, buddy. I don't think he is. And if that scene didn't make it obvious, this game has plenty of blood and gore for all the people who purely come to this franchise for the carnage. Fatalities are plentiful and relatively simple to memorize, the brutality is satisfying when executed, and there's even a new type of finisher called the mortality, which comes in handy when surrounded by enemies. One code of inputs, and Liu Kang or Kung Lao can decimate their nearby foes with a deadly attack. It's a nice new gimmick and saved my life quite a few times. However, where this game really shines is the environmental kills. One could even call this stage fatality the game. Nearly every single area has a way to execute stage fatalities through throws or right combo attacks. Not only is this for some extra bloody flair that everyone's probably going to enjoy, but the game will reward you for going the extra mile via upgrades for the characters or unlockables, from the alternate characters to the concept art. Okay, seriously, is there anybody who actually gets excited by concept art unlocks? I'm genuinely curious. In all honesty, Shaolin Monks shocked me with how good it was, and I'm glad I was able to properly play it for the first time. Originally, there were plans to give Scorpion and Sub-Zero the same treatment, with a sequel called Fire and Ice. But this idea never came to fruition until a chapter of Mortal Kombat 11 was given that same title. Midway Games' president, Divisive, stated that Shaolin Monks was the beginning of a way to give fans a Mortal Kombat game every single year. But this never really happened despite a mostly warm reception from fans, with players and critics praising the game. The cancellation of future spin-off games was likely due to the estimated 1 million copies sales compared to the greater sales of mainline titles. Which is a shame, because I think Mortal Kombat expanding into other genres could easily work with their expansive universe. And I thoroughly enjoyed my time with Shaolin Monks. Now, saying that, not everything aged like wine in the last 2 decades. For example, there was quite an issue with telling players where to proceed. Multiple times, I found myself wandering through areas questioning, where the hell do I go? Especially in this main portal hub in Outworld. This place was one hell of a maze, and the enemies never stopped spawning, making for times where I just wanted to get to the next area a tad bit frustrating. Another frustration was that sometimes I felt like the aim for attacks was a little off. I would aim the analog stick in the proper direction toward the enemy, but Kung Lao would just punch or throw his hat in the total opposite direction, making some fights genuinely infuriating. And while I mostly enjoyed all of the cheesy deliveries and clunky dialogue, because, that's just what Mortal Kombat is sometimes, there were times where I just couldn't stand it.
Whoever you are, it matters little. I have learned to call everyone enemy.
Shang Tsung is trying to turn us against each other. Back in the academy, he was impersonating me. He can morph into anyone he wants. I didn't know it was Shang Tsung at the time. I tried to warn you, and then I realized if someone could look like me, he could look like either of you two as well.
Even just Liu Kang and Kung Lao talking to each other felt awkward, especially since these characters are supposed to be like brothers, but they come off more as colleagues who tolerate each other for the sake of the job.
That is not you. Remember what Raiden said? They are our ancestors.
Raiden said triumphs and failures. I wonder what happened. What was that all about?
I do not know, but I get the feeling that this is something Raiden wanted us to see.
I hope you are not telling me to trust in what I do not know again.
No, we are part of an ancient mystery. That is all.
And while I was not expecting high-class storytelling, but for something trying so hard to not only be the bridge between games, but retelling the first 2 games, things just happen so fast that it feels anticlimactic. But the climax, I felt like I was only 2/3 to the story, and some other twist would come along to lead to events post-Mortal Kombat 2. But nope, I beat the boss, and the credits rolled, and I just went, oh, okay. I guess I just had so much fun that I wasn't ready for it to end. Most of my other issues are just nitpicks here and there, but I did have one last big problem. How dare you make Reptile exclusive to the Versus mode? He deserves to be playable in the story just like the other ninjas. Nope, you know what?
You failed me!
So, despite me wanting more, I was happy with my Shaolin Monks journey, and I hope we get to see something like this again in the future. Sadly, with over 1 million copies sold, this would be the last time Mortal Kombat experimented with any kind of spin-off. And the following year, 2006, saw the release of the next mainline Mortal Kombat game. After Deception, fans were watering at the mouth for another Mortal Kombat game, and the sequel aimed to be the biggest one yet. Mortal Kombat Armageddon. Armageddon was intended to be the Avengers Endgame of the original Mortal Kombat timeline. Except for some characters from the spin-off games, Mortal Kombat Armageddon brought together every single character from the mainline series of games and gave them the 3D era treatment. Since Armageddon marked what was originally supposed to be the ending of the series at the time. When it comes to my personal history with Armageddon, I was there when it was first released, and it was an event to witness. I'll never forget when my older brother brought the game home, and we witnessed At the time, I had never seen a cinematic quite like this one. From the scale to the destruction to a narration that I still randomly quote to this very day.
At the apex of destruction, alliances will be broken. And old hatreds will be revived.
He's back!
At last, it has come to this final battle. Armageddon has begun.
Oh my god, you have no idea how much I love this. Look at this roster. It should be no shock to you any later. This was and still is the biggest roster that Mortal Kombat games ever had, for better or worse. Yet again, Midway includes some new mechanics such as the Creative Fatality, which was a way for the players to come up with their own fatalities using whatever character they wanted. The result was disappointing, but there was something that made up for that, and it was the brand new Create a Fighter. This mode allowed players to take elements of any hero or villain from the roster and put them into a custom fighter, which was unlike anything else at the time. It's shocking that Mortal Kombat has yet to bring this back, because I remember spending hours trying to create the perfect character that fit my style, and even now, it puts a big smile on my face to see my own custom character in a Mortal Kombat game. By then, the 3D trilogy had a pattern that most people memorized when they got into Armageddon. Create a profile and start earning coins in either the arcade or the conquest mode to unlock things in the crypt. Same stuff, different game. Sadly, the crypt was given a substantial downgrade to just being a few screens with everything little to show what each casket holds, thus removing the element of surprise to the crypt. And unfortunately, there almost is zero new costumes for familiar characters. All the assets from Mortal Kombat Deadly Alliance and Deception were just ported to Armageddon with no new changes. With the exception of a couple characters like Reptile, who was given his Shaolin Monks design. Conquest mode returned, and yet again it was given an overhaul. Only now expanded from an exploration game to a melee beat-em-up, which slaps back to a 1v1 fighter when encountering a more iconic character. As Taven, the son of Argus, the player goes through the Mortal Kombat universe encountering iconic foes and often battling them until reaching the end for a big twist. Sound familiar? Yes. Much of what Armageddon brings to the table is surprisingly similar to Deception. One of the biggest complaints people had about the game was that it lacked innovation. To an extent, I definitely see where those complaints are coming from. Most of the combat remains the same when you're going through the arcade or versus modes, and actually, characters were reduced to only 2 fighting styles this time, one of them just being the weapon stance. There are stage transitions, stage fatalities, and environmental weapons, and you fight in the same 3D movement. However, I wouldn't say it's accurate to say that there were no changes to the gameplay. For example, there is now a parry system to go along with combo breakers to help end ridiculously long attack strings. And Armageddon introduced the idea of area combos into Mortal Kombat games, something that wouldn't return until it was nearly perfected in Mortal Kombat 1. Overall though, yes, anyone who had played Deception quickly got a feel for Armageddon, and that was the case for me. I fit right in like a hand in a glove. I know I'm in the minority here, but Conquest was actually a vast improvement in my eyes. Not to say that Deception's Conquest mode was bad or anything like that, but in my opinion, having more linear levels, improved voice acting, and melee combat just made the world much more interesting to explore, rather than just collecting things for characters. The cheesiness is still nice and sharp throughout the cutscenes, while still feeling like a genuine Mortal Kombat story that brought everything together for a finale. despite not focusing on a familiar character. David is the hero of the Conquest mode, and I enjoyed him far better than Shujinko just because he was an actual character to play as in the 1v1 modes compared to Deception, where you just shapeshift into other characters. The problem that arises from Taven, though, is that he is not that interesting of a character. While this era of Mortal Kombat has never been built on giving characters expansive stories and personalities, there was still the memorable qualities of the cast that fans know and love. Kamen, on the other hand, is just bland outside of his genuinely effective combat.
There was no weapon. I'm assuming it was stolen long ago. As for the quest, apparently it's a race to combat a fire spawn named Blaze. Whoever defeats him will succeed Father as protector of Edenia.
I am not here to rescue anyone. I am looking for a temple. Do you know of one?
You fight well. I don't know who you are, but there is always room in the Black Dragon clan for another ruthless warrior.
I have no intention of joining you and your thugs.
Where Armageddon really struggles, however, is its roster. While the massive number of characters is astonishing at first glance and makes for a great gimmick, most of the characters sadly range from decent to completely forgettable. Many characters just blend in and don't do much to stand out from the rest, with some straight up copying moves and abilities from other characters. And once I created my ideal custom character, I really had no desire to play as anyone else featured. Especially when they decided that this should be my big reward as the secret character. And this brings us to another common complaint with Armageddon, with fans claiming that, other than the arcade mode and the now defunct online service, there wasn't much to do with characters. Armageddon seemed to really lack something to hook players besides story mode and the creative fighter. Over the years, Armageddon has gained a reputation as one of the most divisive in the Mortal Kombat series, with some claiming it to be one of the worst, while a loyal following praises it as a worthwhile end to the 3D trilogy. As a kid, I remember loving Armageddon. I put so many hours into it. I had hoped that I would reconnect to it like I did all those years ago. And sometimes I did, and sometimes I didn't. I would say in that division of fans and critics of Armageddon, I am somewhere in the middle. And I think this is where I should sum up my thoughts on the 3D era gameplay as a whole. While Deception Armageddon continues to improve on the formula, and I was able to learn how to play again after so many years, I have concluded that this style of Mortal Kombat just isn't my cup of tea. I definitely wouldn't mind revisiting all these games in the future, but I think 9 times out of 10, I would rather pick games from the original trilogy or titles that came later. I had fun going back to the early 2000s, without a doubt, but the combat, in my opinion, is just too stiff and awkward to control, even at my best. I can see why there are fans of this era, though, and I still enjoy these games for the most part. I would just rather have a classic 2D experience. As for Armageddon itself, I would say it's definitely a mixed bag, but I wouldn't label it as bad at all. In terms of just pure fighting fun, I find that Armageddon delivered on that front by having the most balanced gameplay. Yes, the characters being nerfed in many ways is a disappointment, but the aerial combat is a nice compensation to experiment with. I was able to use my knowledge of the previous 2 games to learn characters fairly quickly. But like I said, once I was able to just design my own character with her own moveset, I really had no reason to play as anybody else. I had probably the most fun conquering the arcade mode with her, and I got to the boss fairly quickly. Oh, right. The boss. This is Blaze, and
Finish her!
Is it too late to ask for Onage again? This is Shao Kahn from Mortal Kombat 2 and 3 levels of cheap. I hated fighting Blaze, to the point of just ending the arcade ladder whenever I got to him. It's not like my custom character has an ending that I care about, so I just gave up and kept restarting the ladder from the beginning to keep earning coins. And literally, the only cool thing about Blaze is that he's a reference to a character that was seen in the background of previous games. Other than that, there is not much else to talk about with Armageddon. There is a silly Mario Kart clone with motor combat, which is there. It's a little fun, but I got bored with it pretty quickly. Even though Conquest is fun, it is my favorite mode of the game, overall, Armageddon is less of an epic event and more of a decent next entry. It was not the bang that Midway wanted Mortal Kombat to go out on, especially since Armageddon only sold about 1 million copies, similar to Shaolin Monks. And thus, Mortal Kombat as a franchise would see its first disappointing sales, resulting in a hiatus for these beloved games. And over the years, this entire 3D trilogy has become the most divisive. Some fans will look back on it with absolute joy on their faces, while some look back and see it doesn't age all that well. And with that, this seems like the perfect place to stop on this stretch on the road to Mortal Kombat 1, right? The 3D era was over. Not exactly. 2 years after Armageddon in 2008, Midway Games released their next game, hopping over to the era of PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. With Warner Brothers as a partner, Mortal Kombat was able to have its first major crossover with another franchise. And it was one that many were not expecting. Mortal Kombat vs. DC Universe. It is as simple as an inner child fantasy can get. Ever wanted to see Batman get tossed around by Sub-Zero, or the Flash pummel Shang Tsung at the speed of light? This game provides just that with one teeny tiny catch. This was the deal breaker for a lot of longtime Mortal Kombat fans. Very little blood and no gore at all. Many felt that this was a betrayal of what made Mortal Kombat so famous in the first place. And from the beginning, many treated the game harshly. I'm just going to get my thoughts on this out of the way from the start. I don't mind it. Look, I love the fatalities and brutalities and even the mortalities as much as the next person, but that has never been the main selling point of Mortal Kombat to me. It has always been the awesome characters, the universe, and the gameplay. I don't always need to see all the gory bits to be happy. For example, other fighting game franchises such as Street Fighter and Tekken rarely feature any form of blood, and they are just as beloved as Mortal Kombat. With that said though...
Captain wins. Fatality.
Yeah, the finishes that we do get here are a little disappointing. Fatalities are lackluster at best, with a few standouts, and the same can be said for the heroic brutalities given to the DC characters.
Superman wins. Heroic brutality.
Still, I don't think that was necessarily enough for me to just denounce MK versus DC. This time around, Midway stripped away a lot of the things that were mainstays of the 3D era. There was no crypt, no profiles, no alternate mode, and not even alternate skins for the characters. Instead, what was shown was what players got: an arcade mode, online modes, and the story mode. The arcade mode allowed players to choose what enemies they'd like to face: all Mortal Kombat characters, all DC characters, or a mix of both. Other than that, it was the standard affair of going up the arcade ladder until facing the final boss known as Dark Khan. Who is Dark Khan? Well, the explanation is in the story. Shao Kahn and the iconic DC villain Darkseid have fused into one being, thus causing the two universes to collide in a cinematic experience that successfully told a story while allowing players to control more than one character. This time the story was told in two different versions of the same story from the perspective of either Mortal Kombat characters or DC characters, allowing for replayability. The reviews for Mortal Kombat vs. DC Universe were mostly favorable, but many still did call it a downgrade for this franchise. However, the crossover did prove to be somewhat beneficial, since Mortal Kombat vs. DC Universe did end up selling more than Armageddon with 1.9 million copies. As for my own history with this Mortal Kombat title, it was the first time I bought a game in this series with my own money. I was already a big fan of both franchises, and after the next game in the series was announced, I decided to buy MK vs. DC and give it a shot. I remember liking it a lot and not really understanding the visceral hate that some of the fans had at the time. And for the most part, that opinion remains the same. So what does this oddball pairing of franchises do right and wrong? Well, on the negative side, MK vs. DC is nearly barren when it comes to content. There is the saying that less is more, but other than the main story, the only other content available is the arcade, which is pretty standard for the most part. I found it out that there were zero options for alternate costumes for characters, when both franchises have plenty of options to choose from, whether it's comics, movies, or television. With that said, the designs we do get are actually pretty good. When it comes to the Mortal Kombat characters, everyone was much more streamlined compared to the 3D trilogy, and they were far more appealing in my opinion. In fact, most of these designs would go on to return in the next game. As for the DC side of things, they are pretty much as basic as one can get. Midway definitely played it safe because Superman looks like Superman, Wonder Woman looks like Wonder Woman, and the Flash looks like the Flash. Everyone looks straight out of classic comic books, and for the most part, it works. However, sometimes they don't mesh well with the far more detailed Mortal Kombat designs. The combat is still very much part of the 3D era, with a 360 movement, but simplified a bit. The weapons and stances are gone, but the move lists are expanded. I definitely had less trouble adapting to fighting the enemies, yet there was still plenty of challenge to keep me on my toes. There is this really bizarre addition to the combat where you pull the enemy in to deal damage via quick time events. To put it bluntly, this mechanic was downright useless, but I did enjoy the transition attacks, which are similar, but executed far better, allowing the player to knock the enemy to the next stage with a fancy special move. Not only are they satisfying to the eyes, but they can quickly change the outcome of any battle. I would definitely say that MK vs. DC is the most beginner-friendly of the 3D era, and I see that as a positive. In my opinion, the 3D era was trying so hard to make it difficult to learn the mechanics, whereas MK vs. DC was simpler to learn while still having plenty of layers to master. As a result, this was probably the most fun I had with the 3D era controls, but it was so far from being my favorite Mortal Kombat gameplay. For example, EC characters sometimes just felt awkward to control due to them clearly being nerfed. Like, why is Green Lantern just walking around on the ground like a normal fighter? Sometimes their combat just didn't fit, even with the ones that I genuinely had fun controlling. My personal standout characters were Superman, Scorpion, and Catwoman. For me, Superman ended up being my key to defeating Dark Khan. Because Dark Khan, though he's not nearly as hard as, say, Blaze or even Onaga, he still was a total pain. And as Superman, I was able to beat him down.
Superman wins.
Like I said, I like everybody almost equally on this roster. Since the story allows the player to control multiple characters and adapt to their playstyles via their respective chapters, I got a good grasp on everybody pretty quick. As for said story, it is definitely all over the place, and a lot of things are unintentionally silly, but there is still a lot of fun to be had in seeing these two mythologies clash and the worlds come together. The best thing I can say about the story is that it walked so that the next game could run. Almost everything in future Mortal Kombat, as well as a certain other fighting game franchise, entries got their start with MK vs. DC. The story being broken into chapters about different characters, the designs of said characters, and even many famous voice actors for characters, including the wonderful Richard F. Cart as the voice of Raiden.
We have come to challenge you in Mortal Kombat.
He is the best take on Raiden in my eyes, and I could see why he would go on to voice the character for 3 more games. And while the story is just popcorn fun from beginning to end, sometimes I wish it wasn't split up into 2 different campaigns. The 2 different stories play out very differently from each other, so it takes a little bit of brain power to figure out what sequences in the Mortal Kombat storyline connect to the ones in the DC story. It's a weird nitpick, I know, but I'm glad I didn't continue this in other games. And that's essentially all there is to talk about, showing just how minimal this game was compared to its predecessors. That doesn't bother me too much since that's how classic Mortal Kombat games are, but I do understand why the lack of content let many down. Well, there were plans for DLC characters such as Quan Chi and Harley Quinn, but due to financial issues, this was cancelled. As a whole, Mortal Kombat vs. DC Universe is a fun experimental title. It has its faults and is leagues below the best games in this franchise, but there's still fun to be had all around. I'll be 100% honest, I would love to see this concept explored again in the future. Mortal Kombat vs. DC Universe would plant the seed that would eventually blossom into the Injustice games, and both of those games prove that a proper DC fighting game can work, and since DC characters continue to appear in Mortal Kombat games, I believe a reboot of Mortal Kombat vs. DC Universe could be better than its precursor. In the end though, Mortal Kombat vs. DC Universe would end up being the final entry made by Midway Games. The company would, sadly, file for bankruptcy and close its doors in 2010, marking the end of an era. Midway would no longer bring Mortal Kombat games to the fans. But the series would not die there. Under the umbrella of Warner Bros. Games, a new studio arose like Hanzo Hasashi to continue the fight and deliver more of the Mortal Kombat franchise for the rest of time. They would be known simply as NetherRealm Studios, and they would resurrect Mortal Kombat from the grave once more by rebooting the franchise for a better future. However, that section of road is best saved for another time. For now, I want to thank all of you for joining me on this nostalgic, yet bumpy trip to the 3D era, and I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please make sure to hit the like button as it really helps us out. If you'd like to be updated every time this channel uploads content, all it takes is clicking the subscribe button, as well as the bell icon so you get notified of every new video and stream. Thank you to our amazing supporters such as JA-87 on YouTube. Your loyalty and appreciation means the world to us here. With that said, I can't wait to see you all again, and hopefully it will be a smaller wait between episodes. Thank you all for joining me, and until then, I bid you all farewell.